What's up, everybody? Welcome to the latest edition of Leaders in Racing right here on Racing America. I'm Alan Cavanna, and so happy to be joined for this episode by Joe Gibbs Racing President Dave Alpern. Dave, how are you?
Alan, I am doing well. Thanks for having me. It's good to be on today.
We're
All
talking
right.
leadership, man, and you have the ultimate story in terms of you start as unpaid intern and work your way up to the president of the company. How do you even start a journey like that to tell the story of how this happened?
Yeah, I speak to college students all the time, and I tell them that your journey probably isn't going to go exactly the way that you plan, and that's okay. And mine, I'm a great case study for that. Yeah, no, I had the opportunity out of college to be an unpaid intern for a startup NASCAR team. I knew nothing about NASCAR. I moved from DC to come down here, and I tell this story often that they didn't have anywhere to put me, so they emptied out a broom closet and like a legit broom closet, and they put in one of those elementary school desks. The top's attached to the bottom, wooden. There's no electrical outlets in a broom closet, so I had an orange extension cord, and I had a lamp. And this is early 90s, so there's no internet, no computer. So I have no screen. I have a spiral notebook. I have a phone that has a cord all the way duct taped to the ground to the receptionist desk. And that was how I got my start. I had no job description. I didn't get paid for the first 6 months, so I slept on the floor with JD Gibbs and one other guy. And it was about the most unglamorous start to a career. And I just remember feeling like, what a failure I must be to my parents that I'm working in a garage in a broom closet, not getting paid in Charlotte. But I learned something early, and that was the who was more important than the what. And what I mean by that was I was working for my hero, Joe Gibbs. My best friend, JD Gibbs, was working with me. What I was doing kind of stunk, but we could have been selling coat hangers and it didn't matter because the what, as evidenced by me, can change over time, but the who doesn't. And so working for someone I really believed in, I was like, hey, I'd really like to stay around. I love being around. I love learning from Coach Gibbs as the ultimate leader. And so it was not a very glamorous start, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. But yeah, no, and then through a crazy series of events through 30 years, I became the president.
You mentioned learning to lead. There's a lot of different leaders, right? There's CEOs, there's corporate,
Yeah.
politicians, and then there are coaches. What skills do you learn when you're studying the leadership of a coach? How does that pan out?
So when you think of a leader, you think of the traditional, what I call it, the alpha leader. Joe Gibbs is the prototype alpha leader. He walks in the room, he's the guy. He commands the attention. He's good at it, not from an ego standpoint. That's just the way they're wired. They want to lead. They want to tell people sort of what direction to go, and people want to follow them. I'm actually very different than that. I would describe myself more as a reluctant leader. I am not the alpha. I admire people like that, but I'm not like that. But and when I was younger, I thought that just meant maybe I'm not a good leader. Maybe I'm not meant to be a leader. But I say this all the time to people that companies need complements, not clones, meaning they need people who complement each other. They don't need a bunch of clones. So not every leader has to be an alpha leader. I think if I was the prototype Uber alpha leader like Coach, we would have killed each other a long time ago and I wouldn't have lasted. But I compliment him. My gifts are very complementary of what coaches are. They're not clones of what coaches are. So I think leaders take a lot of different shapes and sizes and personalities, and God wired us all differently. Obviously, I've learned from Coach one way, his way of leading, and he's in two Hall of Fames for a reason because he's an amazing leader. But all leadership is influence. And leadership is influence. That's all it is. It's not title. It's not anything. If you are a person, if you influence people, you are a leader, and you can influence people in different ways. And again, some people bang the desk and they command leadership that way. Others do it by leading from example. Others do it through humility. There's different ways. So I think watching Coach has demonstrated to me, because what he does a great job of is really picking people and building them up at what they're really good at. And Coach and JD Gibbs really, I think, were the first two people who really saw in me leadership ability that I didn't see in myself. And I thought just because maybe I'm not wired like him, I wasn't cut out to be a leader. So that's been something I could really point to.
You start with a spiral notebook and an extension
Yeah,
pen. At
yeah,
some point, they see that leadership quality.
yeah.
Do you remember that first time you had to step up, maybe not be the alpha male, but take a leadership role at Joe Gibbs Racing?
I do. And again, going back to a lot of its influence, and I found that I was able to influence, I would give coach advice or I would, it was 100 little things. It was being good at a really, and again, this is actually biblical. Like to be entrusted to big things, you got to start by being entrusted with small things. And for me, it was all small things in the early days. Hey, they want you to put a sticker on a car. They want you to write an email for a crew chief when emails started becoming a thing, and crew chiefs were like, "Hey, I'm not a good writer. Could you write an email for me?" And I made it a point early on that I was never going to say that's not my job ever. I was going to do whatever anyone asked me, and I was going to try to be great at all the little things. And making an analogy with a sports team, there's always that one player on the team who's not the best. They're not an all-star, but they are that one team that one player on the team you could not do without because they make everybody else better. They're like the locker room guy. And I was like, I'm not the best at anything, but I'm going to be that guy. I'm going to be the locker room guy that everyone's like, we can't do without Pern. So I tried to be so I think it was just a series of little things that as I was faithful with those, coach would start asking more of me and more of me. And yeah, so I don't know that there's one time, but I think it was just a decision I made early on that I'm gonna I'm gonna deliver more value than I cost. That's a principle I talk about all. If you want job description, just deliver more than you're paid.
To start from where you did, Joe Gibbs Racing in general, we know about the Daytona 500 very early, but eight
Yeah.
years in, 8 years in of climbing the ladder, you're Cup champions, right? And how do you describe your role in that and what you thought about that?
Yeah.
Because looking back on it, zero to champion in 8 years is pretty good, and that takes
Yeah.
good leadership. How did
Well,
that happen?
I would start with coach would see that the other way. It took him, he went to the Super Bowl his second and third year in the NFL.
Oh,
And so it took us 8 years, and that shows how hard this is. Like I think I felt like that humbled us because we got into this. But to your point, when you ask about what was that like, remember it like it was yesterday. The banquet used to be at the Waldorf Astoria in New York. And I remember sitting at a table with, I had my wife there and JD and his wife and Todd Meredith, another young guy who had started it with us and his wife. And we're literally looking around and there's Roger Penske and there's Rick Hendrick and there's Jack Roush. And we're like, are you kidding me? We won. We beat them. Like that for me was it's obviously one of the highlights of my career. And this idea that, man, we're really going to make it. Like we belong here. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't, I don't make the car go fast directly. And at JGR, we're all about making the car go fast and speed. And so, it's easy to lose sight of that. And I think one thing, again, going back to great leadership. So any company needs to know what's your North Star. For us is going fast. Very simple. But not only what is your North Star, what is your mission? But does every person in there know what their role is in the mission? So at JGR, does every person know what their role is in going fast? And coach had a way, even for people like me who don't touch the race car, of having me buy into how important what I did was, or how important what I do is to going fast. And I think winning that first championship, I was able to really feel satisfaction in it.
I'm glad you brought up the competition side because NASCAR is
Yeah,
so unique in terms of going fast on the racetrack. But then there's the business side that maybe some other sports doesn't have sponsorship and all
for
that
sure.
stuff. As team president, how do you balance those things? Because I feel like you have to. Do you feel like you have to lead both of those departments? The competition and
Yeah.
business. How
It's
how do you do
yeah.
that?
It's easy to feel like a cat with a laser pen sometimes because you have competition and you have business. What's so unique about NASCAR is the four major stick and ball sports average around 15% of their total revenue comes from sponsorship. It's a nice to have, but it's not a have to have. For a NASCAR team, it's over 60% on average of our revenue comes from sponsorship. So as a result, an executive on a NASCAR team is going to spend an inordinate amount of time on sponsorship than an executive on another pro sports team. So it is a balance. And if you look at the profile of the different team presidents, many of them are different. I came up the first 20 years of my career, I was 95% externally facing, meaning I was dealing with sponsors and NASCAR and the tracks and that's really natural to me. So I see the world through the business side. There's other team presidents who came up through the competition side and they see the world more through the competition. But so to answer your question, yeah, it is hard. You try to be strategic and get ahead of things. You often find yourself dealing with, it's kind of like being a parent. You're only as happy as your saddest kid. So whatever department is struggling or needs help the most, that's the one that you're focused on. But at our core, it's all about performance. We can have the greatest sponsorship department in the world, and if we run 30th every week, we're out of business. Doesn't matter. So you got to win.
How is that relationship with NASCAR in 2025, the business side, pushing things forward? How is that from the team side and working with all the players?
Yeah, and I mean, again, I've had the perspective of 30 years. I've dealt with a lot of NASCAR executives and I've been through a lot of different brand promotions and marketing campaigns. But again, at its core, I believe in what NASCAR is about. I love the idea that in our sport, the sponsor becomes the identity of the team. We're not a patch on a jersey. The car becomes the actual identity of a brand. And we are the all-American racing series. I don't care what anyone says. You look at the ratings. What are they watching? They're watching NASCAR. I love that. I love the access. And so that part hasn't changed. The names and the faces and some of the people, at NASCAR, at the teams have changed. But at its core, that's what we're about. And I think over the years, sometimes we lose our way when we forget who we are. Like I personally don't like country music, but hey, we're about country music, America, good times, fun. You know what I mean? It's a great sport. And so I love that. I think NASCAR does a really good job, with that as well. I have a lot of confidence in them. But I would say, again, our sport, different than every other sport. We are not a league. I tell people we're a little bit more like a band than a pro sports team. We don't own our own arena. We show up and perform every week, and then we move on to the next. We're like traveling circus, and then we move on, and then we perform somewhere else. And so a lot of things are out of our control, but in so much as we control it, we want to be the best, and we just want to win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, that you explained the need to win, and that's what makes NASCAR so unique in terms of the business side. Look, Joe Gibbs has a long history of winning and greatness, but that also comes with tough decisions. Uh, Nothing too specific, but I just think back to it must be tough to part ways with Joey Logano. It must be tough to part ways with a Kyle Busch, a Matt Kenseth. I mean, these are all-timer names, but sometimes tough decisions have to be made. Where did you learn to make tough decisions?
Well, I would say it's the hardest part of what we do because, as coach says all the time, this isn't just business, this is relationships. And you build relationships like you get drivers and they become part of your family. And, every business is like that, but I think pro sports is harder, is even worse. And racing's no different. So, look, that is probably the least favorite part of what I do. And one thing that I would point out about that, and there's a saying, leadership is lonely, and that is a very true thing. Often these decisions are made with information that people don't have. And so as a parent, you tell your kids all the time, when your kids are little, you make a decision and they don't understand it. And you try to explain to them, hey, I know this much about why I'm making a decision. You only know this much. If you knew what I knew, you'd make the same decision. You got to trust me. There's so many things that go into it that you're not just sitting there one day going, hey, I think it'd be good if Kyle Busch, first ballot Hall of Famer, doesn't drive for us anymore. I love Kyle, by the way, and in that case, there was a lot that went into that decision. He took a lot of responsibility in that decision as well. It was two ways. The fans kind of don't always know everything that goes in, and by the way, we don't always get it right. Every situation is different. Joey Logano raced for us for 4 years, and for whatever reason, we couldn't get it going, and we make a change with Matt Kenseth. Matt Kenseth wins 7 races in his first year, but when Joey left, we knew this guy's going to haunt us for 15 years, and he has. And so again, it happens in pro sports all the time. It's really, really hard. Again, I think of Daniel Suarez, and then we transitioned to Martin Truex, and um, it's there's a lot that goes into all of it, but there are relationships, and that makes it really hard. But again, it goes back to our mission. We have 500 families here that are dependent on us to make good decisions. And what I always tell people is, before you get mad at us, just know when we go to bed at night, we're doing what we think's best for those 500 people. Doesn't mean we always get it right, but we care even more than the other people who care because this is our life.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
In terms of leadership being tested, few have been tested, unfortunately, like Joe Gibbs Racing, losing JD and Coy, leaders of the team, but also family, obviously. In those moments, what do you look toward in terms of not only having your own personal feelings, but having to lead that team, those 500 other families, and move forward? Where do you get the strength?
Well, I mean, again, if I'm speaking personally, and I could speak for Coach, for us, it's our faith. And I would say, I actually have no idea how we would have navigated that um, without our faith and God's word and God's faithfulness to us and to this company. And um, you know, interestingly for me, I was introduced to my faith through JD Gibbs in high school. So it was, ironic that what got me through JD's illness and death was the very faith that I first saw modeled in him in high school. But to your point, I mean the leadership aspect of that, I had to address our entire team twice for both JD and Coy's death. At times when I didn't want to go out in public and say anything, but at some point you got to get up in front of everybody and you got to say, "Hey, we're gonna be okay." Even if deep down I didn't feel like we were going to be okay because I was wrestling with it, and that's okay. But again, I think sometimes with leadership you got to do things that you don't want to do. And yeah, no, what the Gibbs family has endured is unimaginable, and the way that Coach has handled it and the way that he's leaned on his faith and the way that that's strengthened him. And Coach now has been able really to minister. He wrote a book called Game Plan for Loss, where he deals with something everyone's dealt with, which is the loss of a loved one, and how do you navigate all that? And God's really used it for us. But I think, and for me personally, that's really one of the things that motivates me every day is, I took JD's job when he got sick. So I have my best friend's job at his family business. And so how can I be the link to JD, that culture boost that JD was by the way that he treated people? I always say JD treated people like a soul and not a transaction. And so that really is kind of my purpose here, is that I can never be JD, but I can instill many of the things that made this place special through JD. And so that's kind of what keeps me going, I think, as a leader going forward.
Thank you for sharing that. Just a couple more. We'll go back to the
Yeah.
competition side. Driver star power in 2025. I think we're seeing it evolve a little bit. Drivers, I feel like, are getting more involved again and putting themselves out there. It feels like the 90s, early 2000s again. We're seeing more commercials, more personality.
Yeah.
From the team president side, what do you expect out of your drivers? How do you push them forward?
Yeah, I think one of the things that Coach does a great job of, and he did this in the NFL, is letting our drivers be themselves. They don't have to come be a corporate cookie cutter. Obviously, you got certain things you want them to do, and a lot of it depends on your sponsor. If your sponsor is Monster versus if your sponsor is, just maybe a more corporate or whatever. I think there's varying degrees of what they're looking for. Coach let Tony be Tony. Coach let Kyle be Kyle. Drove us crazy sometimes, but but that's Coach. So that's one thing I've learned is we're not, you know, you got to give them guardrails, but you want them to be them and what makes them great, and to not stifle that on the track or off the track. And yeah, no, I think you're right. I think our sport has lacked that. Is the diverse personalities that you had, and the guys, Dale Earnhardt, Rusty Wallace, all those, and I hope we're seeing an emergence of that. And when you look at our driver lineup, I mean, gosh, we have a wide array of, you got 22-year-old Ty Gibbs with Monster. You got 40 something Denny Hamlin, who's got a podcast and he's outspoken and everything in between with Christopher and Chase Briscoe. And I love that about our sport. And I do think that's an important part because look, our sport revolves around a fan's connection to a driver. It's a big deal.
You started in 1992. We're in 2025. It's your fourth, well into your fourth decade at Joe
Thanks.
Gibbs Racing. What's next for another 3 or 4 decades? We hope you're around.
Yeah, no, well, I appreciate that. I don't know about that, but yeah, for me, again, I'm past the point. Dude, look, I love winning, but I love winning for what it does for others. I love bringing a partner to their first race and getting to watch them go to victory lane for the first time. That's what gives me a thrill. I like seeing a driver get his first win and a crew chief. And again, I'm almost like the pastor. Like I just want to I want to make sure I'm caring for the flock. We got super smart people. They don't need me to tell them how to go fast. I'm there to care for them as people and hopefully leaving a legacy. Again, when I look back to JD and, he had an hour and a half service about his life. Nobody mentioned one thing about any accomplishment at work, but it was about the influence of he had on people as a result of the good work that he did. So I look at this as I hope I'm influencing people and leaving a legacy that's far beyond winning trophies. And that's kind of how I look at it. And as long as I'm around, that's kind of my goal in the industry is to leave a legacy because the wins and losses are great, but they're not going on my tombstone. What's going on? What's important is the influence that I'm going to have on people, and that's really what leadership's about to me.
Well, from intern to team president,
Yeah,
it's a heck of a journey in
yeah.
terms of leadership. Dave, thank you so much for joining us.
Alan, hey, thanks for having me today.